welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the end of the month, May 31, and look at what we've got here. A little white candle represents the namesake, MBI, so Morgan Buy Indicator. White candle is what we have that the market shows now. It's showing this in green trend. The last one we had was the first of the year, because of this ridiculous trend of straight up that we've had. It showed up right down here. That was what, 419? Yeah, 419. That came in at 1555 on the cash index here, and you can see that we went super parabolic, and we're just kind of consolidating now, kind of what we expected when we peaked out here, well above the magenta line here, where we get into what I consider sell mode. And in this particular case, we were looking more just at retraces of the positive extremes, and that's pretty much what we got. So no real shocks with anything. The fact that we have an MBI with a positive extreme, unusual, yes. You can go back 10, 15 years in the daily chart here, you're not going to find that setup. It also comes with conflicted readings. We have shakeout, not making new. Histogram high readings, and below the yellow line you still have the red, though, at the super peak level. And it's typically when this red starts to come down, the yellow will come back up to meet it. So we should still get a positive move from this. Now we're still in sell also from a power Mo standpoint, which means you have to be just a little bit more cautious. It's not throw caution to the wind and just figure it's all going up. We were expecting a little bit more of a volatile kind of move as we broke out to these highs a little bit early to call for a breakdown, but you're close to a point where that can happen. So that's something that has to be respected. It's not something we get paranoid over. It's just something that really should be paid attention to at this particular point, because we always expected that we would end up making new highs at some type of lower shakeout reading that would then result in a more significant decline. And it's not what perennial bulls want to hear, but it's just the reality of things. So people just get a little anxious a little too soon, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. So this is exactly what we expected from our up and down power, where bears got a little strong. They're represented by the red histograms. They came down, and then boom, the problem was that you still had too many buyers. And this is often what happens with shorts. They see the potential of a breakdown, they attack it, but they don't recognize the strength of those that continue to buy into the dip. And it's until this begins to waver, and I would look for it somewhere down under the 2 range, that it becomes vulnerable. When you get down here, then you can have a more sustained breakdown. For those looking at EMAs, 13 EMAs, the magenta line, that's a popular one for institutions. So they'll say that, oh, well, it came down to that, hit it, and people bought. Fine, okay. The reality was it started up and just continued from there early on. Interesting for our price oscillator, because again, we talked about this setup here, looking for that 2020, almost have identical reading to the last time an MBI came in. They have no correlation to each other, so it's interesting to see that. And you can see, though, that even after that, came down a bit in there and allowed for a buy before it popped back up. So weakness that takes you back down to the low of the day, which was 1648 range, would be very attractive. So keep that in mind. Buying it as it moves above, it's a good way to utilize it. You can also see the day ended fairly bullish right there with that dip below the cyan line on our extreme histogram here, and that's why it's colored green. And this was a setup that we saw a lot on those stocks that we pointed out at the end of yesterday, and we were looking for them all to bounce. I mean, those included quite a few different names. We'll look at some of them as we move on. Gold, we had the bifractals in the form of, well, this was the series buy. We had a different series buy here and a pivot. All before we had the extreme fractal. Traded sideways because it got a little overbought on the sudden move coming off of being extreme oversold. And this is something I tell people to look for when we have this extreme oversold. You tend to get these violent bounce backs, especially if you've had a number of days. And Facebook was a primary target of this, where I was like, okay, I'm lowering our adjusted basis, looking for the lows of, if not the day before, the previous one. And sure enough, gold popped there, but didn't sustain it. And it's kind of what we expect to see happen with Facebook as well. It'll fade or consolidate, and then it's your next move, because now you'll notice that, oh, lo and behold, just like I suggested, that the ERH white line right here would be moved up. Another dip down of the either yellow or gold below it would be a very bullish signal. So that is something to pay attention to. And clearly in buy mode from the power mode, though it has gotten a bit overbought. I don't have the yellow lines on here. Let me go ahead and do that for you because it does give you a little bit better representation. If I just type in true, it makes these things very easy to see. And you can see here they go, it just adjusts it lower. So not overdone, because if we were overbought, you would see the white and the magenta above the cyan and yellow, and you don't have that taking place at this particular point. The reason I leave it off is sometimes it gives you a better view of those crossover points, and you're able to see it. And you can see also that the positive reading, which is the dark cyan, plus 1.68, is 618, is negative, -2. So that's creating a mini chaos event inside of gold at this particular point, with the close at, let's mark it, 136.70. So keep that one in mind. Now USO was one that we wanted to be out if we were below 33.20 and back in on a move back above, particularly if you could catch a little bit further down. It started all the way lower at that particular point, and then boom, it presents with an MBI at this particular stage. I would expect a little more weakness from this because we don't have any buy signal from either the ERH, we don't have it from the shakeout, and you're still lower with the power mode. So kind of an unusual higher close to point out this MBI. So it's kind of an anomaly. Always interesting to see those happen. They do. CLF. Now, for CLF, what we had done, and I'll have to get this back on the website. And speaking of the website, this will be, well, you're probably viewing it on the main page. I'll also have it on YouTube. After today, we'll probably have everything put back with protected member content. But some people were asking, what the whole point of the hacking was. Typically what they're doing is they're trying to insert a worm that will locate those that are trying to access certain indicator pages or videos, and I'm certain that the idea is they figure that members will have indicator details that they'll be able to get, and it's not the case, but how do you convince people of that? It's crazy, but that's the general intent behind it. So CLF, we had sold the 20 put. We were looking for at least 40 cents in it. We weren't too concerned about getting put those shares because we knew that we were going to get into an oversold area, and that we also still have that 2062 as a move back above. So if we get put the shares, which a pretty good shot of that, this particular point, one never knows, because this thing can bounce a couple of dollars in a heartbeat. You think that you're like all poised to get it, you're going to be at a point where you're going to get a great buy signal, and the thing will skyrocket it, and we'll get to keep the premium, but we won't get any shares. It's okay, not worried about it. Also, Borderline, we had sold for X17, oh no, 1850s. It was WLT that we did 750. We sold 18s, and we were looking to get at least a quarter for those when we did it. It could go either way. We're right at the cusp of it. Also puts in an MBI, but oversold clearly here as you near the zero line, which is the red. That's how you can determine what these numbers all represent. So if you're just looking at these and can't tell if it's crossed over, you can just look at the numbers. They're right there, and that's what you're also going to be seeing on the radar screen that I showed before. But you can see 1.7, 2.4. Those are low, and it gives you an indication that you're near oversold or extreme. And particularly if you've already been negative, and in this particular case it was negative 2.6 previous day, and now it's rising. And so what you look for is a strong cross the next day. So something like actually to expect a gap higher, that kind of a move with this particular setup. And it still has that bifractal target, 1935. WLT, we had sold 1750s, and we wanted to wait until we were able to get our full 45 cents for those. Fortunately, it continued lower, which was nice. We knew that we were in a sell mode. We also know that we have this chaos event that we're expecting a return back up to that 1937 close area, and so it was an opportunity to both collect the premium and potentially get the shares somewhere right around $17 range, which I would consider excellent at that spot. Unfortunately, it popped up a little bit iffy. Don't know. Hasn't crossed to buy, though. Typically typically when you get this flat move from the power mo white, that's the prelude to a decent pop. And oftentimes with these, again, these energy stuff, they can gap up and they don't give people an opportunity to enter, and that's why we were a little more aggressive with some of those puts, simply because we also didn't mind the value point at which we were getting them. BBRY, I keep talking about that 1455 as a point where you want to be long above and or otherwise out. But you put in a new bifractal, so we had the previous one, which had a target of 1502. This one now has a target of 1509 on the orange dot, also an MBI. That's crazy when you start looking at these now, because just randomly going through a series of different stuff, all of them are popping up with MBIs. At a time where the market to a lot of people seems extremely extended, unable to, continue. So it's something you got to bear in mind when all that stuff starts popping at the same time. The oversold on HLF is nearing a pretty strong point for a turnaround, and you're right at the cusp of the, if we look at it, the fast stop 4634 is the fast stop. Not exactly perfect with my alignment on the it's close enough, but not quite there, so just slightly above it. That's also a GAM, so expect a decent size volatile move. And now that you've gotten to the near oversold, I would be looking for that to break to the upside, so that's an opportunity to potentially jump into the next month's options, blah blah blah, however you want to prefer to play it. Oh, the fun one, Facebook, going all the way back from over here. We talked about this as it was declining, and we were just waiting for the buy crossover, but the buy crossover to come where we would also get a corresponding dip of, and we just talked about this yesterday, of the ERH down towards the white line. And lo and behold, if it did not just open, and where was my number? I said we wanted to be long if it got back above 2410, and sure enough, it came up, obliged that perfectly, dipped a little bit. Nice buy crossover there. Didn't quite get below. That'll be interesting to see if we can punctuate that below, because there's such a low reading here for the ERH white. But someone has me ERH. It's for expanded ratio histogram. ERH, and that's fine. But we really wanted to see that pierce it below, because that will give us the strongest potential. We didn't get overbought with this. Negative 27 for the reading there, so it's not overbought. So there's the potential that this Facebook can continue now. It's going to have to prove itself. Again, though, red trend MBI, I look for about a third discount. So if you missed this, which I don't know how you could have, I mean, I was replete with pointing these out daily, but needless to say, you take the high-low range and look for at least a third retrace. Is typically in red trend what I look for when I get a signal. If I were just starting out, this first time I saw this page, if you get a gap up in the morning above this MBI, then it's unlikely you're going to get that retrace. It should just skyrocket from there. And again, 2660 is just a return back to the chaos value. Nothing special other than where the move was orchestrated, and this was the algorithm detecting the imbalance of trade activity. We also had flipped to our trend. I mean, our short signal came back over here, though. I mean, that's a whole different issue, but needless to say, you ended up with the bifractals. And some people ask me on this, well, what do you do when you get the bifractals there? Well, again, oftentimes what I'll do is, if I'm committed to a short at a decent spot, in this particular case it was an excellent entry, I'll use the actual dot target as my cover point, simply because it becomes a defined value that you would expect that if you've reached that, you're the potential of a serious up move. Just a sideline to throw that. American Express, nothing doing the same as it always does. So let's flip over to our MBI opposites, and again, well, this happens to be the NASDAQ. It hit its target. For this one, we can look at what the year results for the NASDAQ have been. From 1/1 of this year, it's okay. 2.55, 73% win rate, nothing to write home about. Over the course of the last decade, pretty consistent within that range. Nothing special there. We liked the ES from this setup from the 1647. I did get a few emails, people telling me I was nuts with that, and not so nuts after it popped up. I mentioned on StockTwits, after 10 points was a good opportunity to take that gain. If you did that, great. You can lower your re-entry 2 points to 45, and that would be a great place to get back in. And you can follow me during the day, and I will point out ES setups to see if we get any move lower. But that allows you to capture, 2 extra points before re-entering. Still, people say, well, what's the overall target for this? Well, if we look at that ATR, it says 17.14. You multiply that by 1.26, and that tells you what the up target is going to be, 20 plus points from the 1650. So all the way back up to that 1670 plus range is what this target expectation is off the Eagle Hawk. And I believe that's a Rainbow Hawk inside there too. So all fun with that. And you know what? We also have the Russell had entered a new one. Slide it over here. Some people do trade the Russell. 993 is the entry on that one. This is what the Russell's been doing since 2005, roughly. Let's see what the current equity curve. Not too horrible so far for this year. 2 profit factor, 75% win rate, 24 trades. Okay, it's you kind of ho-hum. Most people are not getting those results, but ho-hum when you compare it to what the 50K has been, just a monster. I think right now it's at 156 points for the month. This on top of last month's stellar performance. Is in 2 trades. One of them is slightly upside down. That happens. That buy was at 1650, 650 versus this one 1650. And this one went undefeated so far for the month, and it will close out the month undefeated because, well, I guess this trade could end tomorrow. If it trades and ends tomorrow, it would be the first loss of the month on 7 wins. So even if the losses took place, it would still be pretty phenomenal. And the reason why we kind of chuckle at the NBI Opus, which was a phenomenal program. I mean, it's just stellar. I mean, look at these numbers here: 5.38 profit factor, 51 trades for the year so far, 74% win rate. So the win rate not huge because it's able to follow these trades for much larger wins. It's been successful. So buys at that deep red trend moves, and boom, takes advantage of it. There are those with the indicators that have the adaptive trend model, which turns green a little bit sooner. That would probably be a little more identified. I don't know if I have it on this one. Let me look real quick. Oh, I do have the adaptive trend. Let me see if I turn it on, if it make a difference. Some people say, well, what are you turning on? And I see there's a little program right there. Ah, there's the adaptive trend. So you see how it changed that? These were all red, turned them to green. And that's because it recognized the change in the underpinnings and altered it. So interesting, always worth showing these things. I was going to show a couple other things here. Oh, PCLN. This was a good one because we talked about this trade and all these long calls. It was crazy as it was skyrocketing, but we were doing it off of a 78-minute chart. Now that's interesting because the daily closed right here after a great move and still has 832.96 target. Wow. Now will that execute by the end of the day Friday? Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, you're at the positive extreme here. We can turn to 78-minute chart because this is where we began to look at those setups, and we had our buy back down here at the 791. I gave that one for everyone just the other day after it had its little mini collapse from reaching the 820 target back over here. That a lot of people thought was crazy. And it put it in a red dot short. And what did it do? It retraced from there and was, 790 is not going to hold support. And it was like, okay, I put up the chart, showed you very clearly bifractal, combination bifractal, additional bifractal. There's a big group, and I put up Google as well at the same point to show exactly what the potentials for these. And it was like, this is a screaming buy. You're oversold. You're at the red line, about to move above it, and then sure enough, what does it do? It takes off. Boom, hits the chaos event, which happened to be right there. Now the close of that one was actually 809.90. I said about 810. Fine, plus or minus a buck or whatever. Now, did put in a new bifractal even after that huge move, but it consolidated it a little bit because when you change from red trend to green trend, we should look for 1 to 2 bars. Now, it would be the second bar lower at 807.83 that to me was the attractive buy setup. Didn't really get into it too deep. You can already see that it's already eased off down to 5 and a 10, so you're not overbought now in your 78 minutes. So is it potentially possible that you're going to break up past that? Yeah, and that target there for the 78 minute, 821. So right in line with those overall dailies, and it's exactly how we approach it. It was no different than Apple. From the 78, we had this real odd chaos event, and what the chaos event was kind of projecting based on what it had done in the past was it was looking for roughly a 3% decline with a 5% increase after that. Well, it was funny because it popped up and gave roughly that 3% decline. It was just shy of it, coming down over here, and then boom, took off after the MBI, and the buy signals off the power mode. It's going to reach that, so it's just interesting to point these things out. Hopefully you enjoy it. Again, with the whole hacking thing, I didn't get to what we see here, but I can go ahead and put it through, and you begin to see some of these intraday where they get oversold with the negative numbers, but you can look at the daily ones and get an idea of whether a stock is oversold or overbought at a glance. When you see these numbers down under 10 for the white, you'll see others that are way up there, which a little too much, like MA, when you're all the way up to 27. You're pretty far up there. But a lot of interesting ones that are still not overbought even through this time frame. So this will be exciting to have. Hopefully get that. I wasn't expecting to have the difficulties, and now I've run very long. Appreciate your patience, but always lots of good details to run through, and I can't put all this stuff on 140 characters. So nice to have all of you who've been able to tune in and get an idea of what it is to trade the MBI. And on the member homepage coming up, I should be able to have for you under the member page here, if I put this up for you, get an idea what it looks like. If you don't see the player, which you definitely would want, because with the player you can scroll back through the previous week and some of the different stock review picks that we had going forward. But at the bottom, I will be able to extend the picks and the trades that we had just to make it a little easier. So we'll do a little revamp. But as always, though, continue to look for me in stock. Trade well.